Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Ezra, a new book, Ezra. Now, we are dissecting a little, slight detour, not a deep dive, but I want to talk about the significance of the time. So when we closed out in Second Chronicles, we see what we saw was a 70-year jump in time. So what was that jump? Well, it was the 70 years that was prophesied, and that's why I want to focus on the importance of prophecy and why this is important for us as believers. So that, and again, I'm not talking about like today, there are just, seem like everybody today, they are prophets and apostles. Well, most cases, fake apostles and prophets. God sets himself aside from these fake prophets, whether Old Testament and New, by really one thing, and that is his prophecies come true. So if God takes the time to say it, prophesy it, it will come to pass. That is one of the sole distinctions of the prophecies of God. Now, as I said before, these books here, okay, the Holy Bible, right? This is the Holy Bible. I got dozens of them around my house, all up there, stuff like that. Okay. Well, one of the things that we forget about this Holy Bible is that we forget that we're holding a collection of books. Okay? A collection of books written over a 1,500-year period of time. Now, why is that important? So let me go back to my thing here, and I hope my screen doesn't freeze up. I'm going to come out of my screen. I was going to go. Let's do this. Let's see if it acts right. Okay. Let's see if it acts right here. Okay, here we go. Good. No. Okay, yes. All right. So the reason I wanted to highlight this, okay, so just in the prophetic writings, why what I am talking about is so important. So you look at Isaiah, right? The prophecies of Isaiah, right? They begin their prophetic utterance about 120 years before the fall of Babylon. In other words, they said Babylon is coming. Now, why is that important? Remember, 120 years before, right? 120 years before. So then we come to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah comes on the scene about 23 years before the fall of Babylon. So if you're reading, and we did read Jeremiah around chapter 25, that was around the 23-year mark. Now, his prophecies, and this is important, his prophecies, they are about the 70-year captivity that the people of Israel will endure in Babylon and then the Medes and Persians. Now, I took the time to talk about, because that's important, what did that mean? And we're going to go back to Daniel in a moment. Daniel's prophecy. Now, he lives, boom. Him and Ezekiel, they are living during the 70-year exile. So the judgment of Israel and Judah, they would be driven out of the land. Jerusalem is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. And the people are in bondage in Babylon. Now, when we get to that, we found out that there is a prophecy that is given to Nebuchadnezzar, and he sees this huge human form. Daniel interprets that human form as 4 world ruling kingdoms, Nebuchadnezzar being the first and the greatest of those 4 kingdoms. The second kingdom is the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. So the 70-year exile will fall into the kingdom of the Mede and Persians. Okay, now we will see that in the book of Esther. Okay, all right, so this is important from this perspective then. So now Jeremiah prophesied 70 years. He prophesied this 23 years before the exile happened. Why am I stressing that that's important? Because prophecy is extremely important, that God, what he prophesied, came to pass. That's why that's important. Now let's go back to Daniel, because I want to again Daniel chapter 9, and I'm gonna just spend a little time on Daniel, and then we'll get into Ezra. Okay. Now remember, this is Daniel. Now is actually probably in his past his 70s, and so the layout of the book of Daniel is the first 6 chapters gives a narrative story, and then from chapter 7, okay, chapters 7 to 12, they're given an explanation. Now remember in chapter 2 in the last study we talked about this image, and then it would interpret 4 world kingdoms. So already that's come to pass. Daniel had given that dream some 70 years before, around 70 years. Well, in chapter 9, the kingdom of Babylon has already fallen. But listen to what he says right here in verse 1. It says, in the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, a Mede by birth, who was ruler over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, okay, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood, now watch this, from the books concerning the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, that the number of years for the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70, right? So 70 years. So in other words, Daniel now is looking at, he's doing his calculations. Oh, wait a minute, 70 years is almost up. So then he begins to pray. Now, let me skip down because I want you to see something that's important here. Okay, this is verse 24. The angel Gabriel has been dispatched to give Daniel the interpretation. And this is what the interpretation, what he saw. He says, verse 24, 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city, to bring the rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring about everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Now I want to stop for a moment and then kind of go back, because again, something that's important you need to understand. The image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, this human form, Daniel gives the interpretation of it, is a prophetic picture from Nebuchadnezzar's time to the end of the world. Extremely important. The image that Daniel interprets to Nebuchadnezzar, is a prophetic picture from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, now watch this, to the end of the world. This is why I, on the one hand, when I hear doomsday scenarios, I'm not ever fazed by that because we already got the prophetic picture. Now that doesn't mean there won't be hardship. That doesn't mean, like for example, we've had, 2 world wars. Okay, so that doesn't mean that won't happen. That doesn't mean, catastrophes won't happen. But certainly the end of the world is not going to happen. Okay, and this is important here. Now watch this. He says 70 weeks. Now what you will get into is these 70 weeks or 70 sets of 7-year periods. Right? Now this is a prophetic time clock here. Now verse 25, and this is most important to our study once we get into Ezra. He says, no one understand this, which means we can. So I told you before, prophecy is not hard to understand. Men make it hard, but it's not. So know and understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 69 weeks. Okay. It will be rebuilt with the plaza and moat, but in difficult times. After those 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. The people of the coming prince will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come with the flood, and unto the end there will be war and desolations are decreed. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and offerings, and then the abomination of desolation will be on the wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out and the desolator. Now let's take a little time to do this, because like I say, I'm going to indulge ourselves here. Remember the statement in 25, from the issuing of the decree. So remember that. We're going to come back to that, because that's where we are in Ezra. But then he says, that begins a prophetic time clock. Now the problem with the time clock is that it's not consecutive when you read through this. In other words, there are 70 weeks. And notice what he says though. 69 weeks pass, and then the Messiah comes and is cut off. Right? Look at verse 26. After those 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. And then he goes on and makes this statement, the people of the coming prince. So then you go on to that kind of prophecy. 1, he's talking about the destruction in AD 70. And then it goes all the way to a kind of a picture of the very end. Now, like I say, since we're not doing a deep dive, if you go back and read Daniel's prophecy, one figure that they are intrigued with was this end time beast. Since that's what he's talking about there. You make a firm covenant. You make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to the sacrifice, and then the abomination that makes desolate. Now, Jesus makes mention of this in the 24th chapter of Matthew. The abomination that makes desolate. Okay. Now, the reason I want to kind of bring this up, like I say, without doing the deep dive, because again, prophecy is simple, however exhaustive. So that's why we don't have time to really go into all of that I just mentioned in terms of where you can find that the book of Revelation is literally this last 70th week / week period. Okay. And if you read the book of Revelation from the 6th chapter on. Okay. Now, understand this though, and this is why I wanted to kind of bring this out. if you are reading, now let's kind of go back because we could do this if we are diligent. The problem again is we have foolish ministers that just mess things up, misinterpretations and everything. However, Scripture has never wavered. Scripture remains the same. This is what I mean. If you are reading the Scripture accurately, you are able to locate yourself within this prophetic time period. Right? Look at this here, which is again astounding. If you're Jeremiah, he was able to locate himself within the prophecies of Isaiah. He's able to locate himself and say, hey, here's where we are. Besides the fact, of course, God giving him the word of the Lord. But notice this statement right here in verse 2. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the books, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet, that the number of years for the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70. So Daniel was able to read the prophecies of his predecessor, Jeremiah. Now, why am I saying that? This is why God has given us this revelation, these prophecies. And then we can locate ourselves. So, for example, if we were to come down and locate ourselves in this 70 weeks, where would we be? 70 weeks are decreed upon your people, your holy city, to bring about rebellion, to end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe out iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the prophecy and to anoint the most holy place, right? So let's do this. Let's locate where we are today in prophecy. Know and understand this: from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 69 weeks. Now remember, the 69 weeks is a 7-year period. It is a 70 set of 70-year periods of time. So when you think about this period of time, notice it brings us to the Messiah. How do we know that? Because verse 26, after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. So right there, we see, as we're following these 70 weeks or 70 sets of 7-year period of time, right? Now, how do you know that? If you do the math from this point of time to the Messiah. That's how, okay? Now, one thing about also prophetic time, it doesn't necessarily mean consecutive time. In other words, you start the clock, tick, 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 okay? But how God regulates it, because we come to the 69th week, and what happens is that, so right now, if we were to locate ourselves, we are between week 69 and week 70, right? So look at verse 26 again. After those 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. But stop. Notice it. So then he says, the people of the coming prince will destroy the city with the sanctuary. The end will come with the flood. Now Jesus, again, prophesied this in Matthew 27. But then he goes on and says, verse 27, he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offerings, and the abomination of the desolation will be on the wing of the temple until the decree destruction is poured out on the desolator. Jesus talks about this abomination of desolation in Matthew chapter 24, which tells us that week 70 hasn't happened. So basically, we are between week 69 and week 70 prophetically. This hasn't happened yet. Now, again, to understand this in depth, we have to go back to the other writings that Daniel talked about, Revelations talk about, Jesus in Matthew 24 talk about, and Paul talk about in 2 Thessalonians. That's to give a fuller picture. So my point is, we can locate ourselves right now. We know these things that have happened. Now there are people, and again, like I said, without getting into the deep dive into prophecy, which I'm not, if you stick with the plain and simple reading, then confusion won't happen. So like I say, we're going to simply ask ourselves the question. Just like Daniel. Remember, Daniel was able to write. Daniel didn't misinterpret and go, well, the 70 years have passed. Just like every now and then you see some dumb will come up and say, here is, Jesus is coming back. You got people who said Jesus was supposed to come back in 1914. You said we was 1989, 1988, right? 1994. And they always, again, misread. That's all. Plain and simple. Which, again, we don't have time to get into that. I'm sorry. But we can, again, we could say we can locate ourselves. We can locate ourselves from the Bible and say, okay, what does the scripture say? So that's why I say prophetically, we are between week 69 and week 70. For the very reason that, guess what? He hasn't broke any covenant, right? Whoever he is, haven't broke the covenant. All right, so I wanted to give just a taste, as I said, to describe it as dipping our toe in the lake. Prophecy, as you can see, deserves a much deeper dive than what I gave. However, it kind of, in a sense, gives us enough. As I said, we can even locate ourselves like Daniel. He was reading Jeremiah and was able to say, here's where we are prophetically. All right, guys, look, next time we will get and start the book of Ezra as it is. And start it at least anyway. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. As always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. See you in the next